Hello viewers, my name is Mitch, and I was the 10th Nazgul. For anybody that saw any of the content on this channel, my name is Mitch. I was one of the co-hosts of Cardboard of the Rings for approximately 2 years. Episode 10 was when I came on. I ended up leaving Cardboard of the Rings a few episodes shy of episode 50. For quite a long time, I created the LOTR LCG progression series with Matthew D., who's now co-hosting on The Grey Company. So I created this video because I've abandoned the LOTR LCG progression series twice now. I haven't created any videos in a very, very long time. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather at the moment, having a bit of an allergy attack if I sound a little bit raspy. So with your understanding, I wanted to make a question and answer video just because I never really explained to the community where I went, why I decided to do what I've done. And there's a little bit of scandal involved with a few different things, and hopefully no longer any hurt or hard feelings. So, just to kick things off, I'll go ahead and say any opinions or anything like that that happens to come up in this video aren't meant to insult or offend, and this is just a lot of personal stuff. On the 10th Nazgul Facebook page, kind of opened up the floor to any sort of questions about myself, personal or otherwise. Of course, the Lord of the Rings living card game, my experiences creating a lot of video content, how I deck build, hosting Cardboard of the Rings, and all sorts of different things like that. So there's quite a range of questions. I've kind of taken these out of order. Hopefully there's not going to be too much overlap. But with that said, let's go ahead and get things started. So, if there's anything you've learned from the progression series, it's that I struggle to read. So I apologize if I mispronounce any names here. Diedert or Diedert, Diedert K opens the floor by asking a series of questions here. He asks, I think you mentioned a bit of why you stopped creating the progression series, or playing LOTR LCG. I'm also very curious why you began in the first place. I actually verified with him that he wants to know what got me into LOTR LCG as a whole, more than what got me started doing the progression series. Really, the initial appeal of LOTR LCG started because I grew up in a little town, I went through high school, made a bunch of friends, had a falling out with them, made some more friends in high school, kind of parted ways with them when we went to college in different places. So ultimately I didn't have a huge group of friends. I ended up going into grad school and kind of lost all those that I had, and then as soon as graduate school was done, I went to Central Washington University in Ellensburg, Washington, and got a Master's of Science degree in Mental Health Counseling. As soon as that program was over with, again, everybody kind of parted ways. I was never terribly close with my cohort, so not a ton of similar interests there. I ended up moving back home to Yakima, Washington, and getting a job was a little bit tricky. I had done an internship at an inpatient psychiatric unit, and I was really holding out to get a job there because it was fascinating, it was fun, but ultimately I started working for a mental health agency as a case manager doing a lot of homeless reach out, so case management for persons experiencing homelessness. If anybody's worked with homeless folks before, they're not particularly motivated to necessarily reach out for help in some cases. Say if somebody is experiencing schizophrenia or drug abuse, things like that are really, really difficult to change, to overcome, and it just ultimately makes for a really difficult experience trying to not only get somebody motivated to get into services, but there have been a ton of budget cuts and all sorts of things like that. So, very long story short, I wasn't very happy with that job. I didn't really have a very strong group of friends, and once these announcements started to come out for the Lord of the Rings living card game, it was unveiled. I just kind of stumbled upon it because I was on Fantasy Flight Games' website looking up things for the StarCraft board game. I had a little bit of a love affair with that, where I ultimately painted 196 little miniatures for the Zerg, the Protoss, and the Terrans, and just really loved that game. Didn't really have anybody to play it with. I had a girlfriend humor me a few times to play some games with me. One of my classmates during grad school was kind of into games, but definitely not the level I was. So, didn't really have anybody to play it with. The appeal of LOTR was that it was a solo game. And I mention all this stuff about my background because during my internship, I kind of developed a little bit of a romantic relationship with a coworker that really just kind of degenerated into a nightmare of a situation. Again, very, very long story short, this person was undergoing all sorts of different stressors in their lives, in their life, and everything was kind of crumbling apart. So they were under a ton of financial strain, a ton of family strain, all sorts of different things, and over time I kind of grew obligated to help this person out. So initially there was this romance between us. We ended up getting a place together, and I figured everything would work out okay, and we by splitting rent I was helping their financial situation and all sorts of stuff like that. So I felt like I was doing a good, responsible thing. I was saving money myself, but ultimately it caused a ton and a ton and a ton of stress. I would hope that you can presume by my, at least I'd like to think, eloquence and my politeness and things like that, that I'm generally a person that stays out of trouble. This person very much kind of began abusing drugs and substances and alcohol, screaming. At one point, she smashed her head into the wall and broke, the whatever drywall that the wall is made of. So multiple police calls, people knocking on my door, asking to come in, and all sorts of different things. So to me, it was this completely hellish existence. And my escape from that was the Lord of the Rings living card game. So as these articles came out, I'd get on the FFG forums and I would post about it. I'd talk to people online that were really interested in it, and I basically just kind of dumped everything I had into escape from this person. On a related note, some other things I did is I was starting to develop a very unhealthy relationship with food and exercise and things like that. So pretty much starting to develop some disordered eating, which more or less persists to this day, if anybody's curious about the details there. But ultimately, I was in a terrible situation. LOTR was really the only thing that took my attention off of a shitty job, a horrible roommate, and all sorts of things like that. So it wasn't long after the announcement came out that Brandon started up the Cardboard of the Rings podcast. And of course, since I had so much going on, and that was a cool thing I could do, some nice community thing to listen to, he and Andrew were putting out episodes every week, every bi-week, something like that. So I'd listen to them while I was at the gym for something like 3 hours a day. So I'd not only read the articles, I'd listen to their content multiple times. I started writing, once the game came out, these extremely long, extremely exhaustive product reviews for Amazon.com, which are still available at the Cardboard of the Rings Facebook page in the notes section. And that kind of became a little bit of an obsession itself. So the top rated whatever review on Amazon for LOTR LCG is written by me. but I was also doing them for adventure packs up until our first deluxe expansion, Khazad Doom. And since I wasn't doing the podcast initially, I just started pouring a ton of effort into that, and they would get longer and longer and longer and absurd to the point where it was just kind of a narrative in and of itself and not really useful anymore. I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but I definitely have the obsessive personality people talk about and take things to extremes and go into an absurd amount of detail. So my Khazad Doom review in Microsoft Word ended up being something like 22 pages long, so it was just way over the top. I added a bunch of, kind of story content where it was basically becoming a big ad for the game. Obviously, I love all of this stuff and want people to go out and buy it and support FFG, so it wasn't like I was turning a blind eye to anything wrong with the game. The Hills of Emon was definitely an early disappointment in my LOTR career, but eventually I stopped doing those reviews, and that was after I'd become part of Cardboard of the Rings. So, kind of as their biggest fan, ultimately I talked to Brandon about getting on the show, and I did so. So, at some point, the woman and I ended up parting ways. It ultimately came down to some horrific night where I was at my parents' place, kind of trying to get away from her. She'd been hiding an eviction notice from me, and again, as the goody two-shoes type guy, I was just horrified about what that meant for me, my rental history, and all sorts of things like that. I remember she ended up breaking my parents' screen door. She was, drunk and stacking all different kinds of psychiatric medications on top of alcohol, on top of painkillers, and all sorts of different things like that. So she broke their door, she drove home, she ultimately overdosed on medication and tried to commit suicide, was hospitalized because I responded to some text cries for help after my phone exploding the entire night. And then as shitty a situation it is, as awful as it was, her being in the hospital and ultimately committed to a psychiatric unit for detention and evaluation for harm to herself, I kind of used that opportunity to work out a deal with the landlord, get all of my stuff out, and since that time I've not really spoken to her or seen her, which is, I think, for the best, because that was just a verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive relationship, so very glad to have that person out of my life. But that is basically the story of my starting LOTR LCG. So it was just an obsession. It was very much something that I love, but even as someone who's never really read the Lord of the Rings novels, front to back, cover to back, whatever that saying is, I've listened to the audiobooks unabridged many times. My favorite story as a kid was The Hobbit. I loved that book, the dramatized audio version. I'd fall asleep to all the time at night, so that was a big part of the appeal, being able to play it solo, because, like I mentioned, I didn't have an established group of friends, and then the fact that it was a cooperative game versus competitive means that generally when I obsess and, focus on a game to such crazy extremes, obviously I end up getting pretty good about it, as much as certain viewers of my videos will argue with me there. I'd like to think I'm a better than average player at most games, and when I can rarely convince somebody else to play a game with me, if I just stomp them into the dirt and crush them, like playing Magic the Gathering or something like that, that's no fun for them, and it really doesn't make them want to, play with me again. So cooperative was awesome, and I still to this day love the LCG model. I can't imagine going back to playing something like Magic where you're buying random card packs. Even playing Hearthstone, I've invested so much money in Hearthstone Heroes of Warcraft that it's just silly. So the LCG model is awesome. Fantasy Flight Games as a company is awesome. And I think that's probably sufficient for how I got into LOTR LCG. The progression series started because largely Cardboard of the Rings is a mix of guys having a good time, which I really enjoy. I was always a little bit more analytical and serious, more like competition focused than a lot of the other hosts. So Andrew initially was kind of, the nightmare mode type player where he wanted to take the game really, really seriously and, do the whole Boromir player archetype, victory at any cost type thing. And that's very much the viewpoint that I have. So Brandon, who I think is probably the most hilarious person I've ever met, he is just incredible to be around in person. And he's a huge part of Cardboard of the Rings. Like, I can't imagine that podcast being... I just couldn't imagine it going on without him. I think he's extremely funny. He's extremely nice. And meeting him at Gen Con and things like that has just been incredible. So, anyways, he's funny, but he definitely isn't as laser focused on winning as I am. And of course, Brian, who, as much as I do very much like Brian, sometimes I have questioned why he's stuck with LOTR LCG, just because it's kind of, I don't know if the term love-hate relationship is really appropriate with him in this game, but in any case, I didn't really feel like either Brandon or Brian, certainly not Andrew, who was then not really a part of the show anymore, I don't think, would have even been interested in my idea for the progression series. I wanted, like in-depth analysis. For the Cardboard of the Rings, I always created these immensely detailed show notes, just like the Amazon reviews, where it's like, here's this article, here are these highlights, here's this card, here are some preliminary thoughts about it, like this is good, this isn't good. COTR has certainly gotten a lot of criticism about, their off-the-cuff card analyses and things like that, and certainly sometimes they are, and that's fine. I certainly didn't want to dominate the podcast or anything like that, so I figured the progression series would be a good outlet for me to drone on and on and on about, here's this adventure pack, and here are my thoughts, and here are some uses for this hero. Here's every single card conceivable that could synergize with this character or this ally. Or have you considered this attachment on such and such? And different things like that. So I ended up picking Matthew, who I think he and I just kind of got to know one another from... He listened to the show and was in school. He reached out to me and we kind of became really good friends. And we just kind of had the idea to make this video series. We ended up meeting, I think it was like between episodes 3 and 4 of the progression series. But we'd been talking for a long time before that. So we were friends. He was kind of similarly analytical, and it just seemed like a good mix, I suppose. There was certainly nothing ever malicious about excluding Brandon or Brian or anybody like that, but things started to become a little bit of a problem once the progression series got to the point where it was starting to overlap with Cardboard of the Rings. And I think a little later in this Q&A, somebody asks, why did I stop doing COTR? And it was just kind of, feelings got a little bit hurt just because people felt like toes were being stepped on, maybe like I was even trying to replace COTR, because I'd basically taken over the Facebook page. Brandon as a new parent, and Brian as somebody who's very busy and has kind of, the love-hate relationship thing going on. Sometimes I questioned, how, quote, serious they were about the game and things like that. So maybe I overreached or something like that. But feelings kind of got a little bit hurt. Um, and it just ultimately was not the best situation. Uh, D-Dirt, again, I apologize for probably butchering your name. No one can pronounce my last name if it makes you feel any better. It's de Grosselier, if anybody was wondering and hasn't somehow seen me on Facebook. Anyways, he also asked why I stopped doing the progression series, and ultimately it was a tremendous amount of work. Something I wanted to do in this video is make sure that editing is basically kept to a bare minimum. So any big pauses, I'll go ahead and snip out. But the progression series ultimately ended up being kind of not the best outlet for me. It was certainly a joy to make, and I loved it, but it was such a monumental amount of work. A lot of it that I just imposed on myself that it was just crazy. Like the card review videos, a lot of people suggested, just don't do those. But that was really what I enjoyed the most, is creating, these analysis videos where I could sit there for an hour and a half and drone on and on and on about these are my thoughts and different things like that. So a lot of people really loved the gameplay videos. That was certainly Matthew's favorite part. But those card review videos were really what I enjoyed. And there was just such a monumental amount of editing involved. That's kind of why I had to stop doing it. At the time, kind of throughout this thing, I was either in school or employed or in a relationship and all sorts of different, single or dating guy things. And some of the progression series episodes, like the longer card reviews, would take maybe 15 or 17 hours of effort. If anybody listens to some of those videos, a good example of the level of editing I would do would be listen to any card review video for Matthew speaking. And as much as I love you, Matthew, you say and quite a lot. So if you compare that to anything he says on The Grey Company, you'll notice that there's a lot of editing that goes on. And sometimes I get so bogged down in my own analysis, it's just like I have to take a step back and think, do I even sound like a human being anymore? Or, I'll flub a sentence 4 or 5 times, so I'll go back and edit all of that out, or I'll edit disparate thoughts together. And it was just an enormous amount of self-imposed work that I did here. So obviously in this video I'm droning on and on and on. It's almost 25 minutes long, and I'm still on the first question, and I'm way, way, way on some tangent, but yeah, succinctness has never been one of my strong points. Kind of a final thing that really took a lot of the joy out of the progression series, part of why I ultimately had stopped doing it, was due to criticism in the comments and feeling like I had to stick to a lot of self-imposed things. For instance, there would be a huge, to me it was really, really disappointing whenever I'd put up a video and there was some sort of mistake. God forbid it was like a game invalidating mistake or something like that. Certainly we lost a few different videos, Matthew and I, to technical problems. Like I remember we recorded some the Blood of Gondor playthrough that we never ultimately released a video for that quest. It was a really cool playthrough. It was really fun, but I think Matthew's audio didn't record, something like that, or his computer crashed, so it was just a ton of, wasted time. I was obviously, I'm sure a lot of people have kind of noticed I'm pretty sensitive to criticism and comments and things like that, or being trolled. So it was just really disappointing when you spend hours recording a video and you end up putting out something that you're really proud of, and then people tear it apart or shit all over it, or the only comments aren't, hey, I appreciate this, or good job, or something like that, but at 15:27 you forgot to put a resource on Theodred. At 17:14 you forgot a point of archery damage. Little things like that where it's just, somebody, maybe they mean well, but they're just kind of picking apart what you've done. So things like that were always really discouraging. I would pull videos. There's some other questions that I'll talk about later. I'll answer in just a little bit that are how I actually make it through scenarios. I think sometimes the videos give the impression that Matthew and I just play kind of blindly and, more often than not win a scenario without really any discussion or without a lot of careful thought and analysis that goes into it. And that's certainly not the case. It's a little bit of editing magic. So it's not cheating, but it's cutting out a lot of boring stuff that I at least assume people don't want to listen to. And then just a couple final things, and what adds to the stress is it ultimately became this thing where for each new increasingly difficult scenario, since I held myself to, I need to, only release videos, well, it's not like I can only release videos of me winning, but the goal of the progression series was to beat scenarios. So every time I lose a scenario, it would be like, okay, I just recorded a loss, so if it takes me 7 hours to edit together this gameplay video, I'm going to end up having to do that again until we win it, and again, and again, and again. And losses, technical errors, all of those things, it makes a ton more work for me. I know in one of the Siege of Kaer Andros videos, Matthew and I do like the first turn and a hero dies. So instead of playing out the entire thing and maybe scraping together a victory and making an extremely long video, we just end up restarting really early on and, include that in the video. But a lot of that stuff, which isn't well received by a lot of forum commenters or forum trolls, is just to save me and my interesting brain a hell of a lot of effort. So I think I've answered that question. This gentleman also asks, what stops me from getting back into the game? And I've very much got the collector obsessive type mindset where I keep feeling like it's not too late to come back, but I've missed so much. There have been so many articles that have come out, and I very much enjoyed doing those article review videos that I started as the 10th Nazgul. So I'm such a completionist and perfectionist that it just really annoys the shit out of me that I can't go back in time and do everything completely. Like, if from the very beginning, let's say I was the main host of Cardboard of the Rings instead of Brandon or something like that, I would just love to have, here's a video playlist of every single article that FFG has ever released. Here's a video reviewing it. Here's every FAQ update. Here's every single scenario played in sequence. Here's fun playthroughs and all sorts of stuff like that. So that would just be perfect for me. And it's not realistic. Of course, it can never happen. I've even thought about doing stuff for Warhammer Conquest, but the fact that that's been out for a couple months now, and the fact that we've gotten articles for the last, I don't know, I think it's 3 months or 5 or 6, I think 6 months. Anyway, it bothers me that I haven't even covered that. There's another podcast or something that I've seen where they're on like episode 14, so it just seems like it's too late to start, and just little things like that hold me back. Brandon laughed at me once for mentioning that when I was playing Fire Emblem Awakening, I have to create, spreadsheets to pair up the characters perfectly so that their children have the best possible stats. I can't really play a new RPG game without getting focused on, what's the min-max character optimization, different things like that. Or games where you level characters up and their stats increase by a random amount. Even my favorite game ever of all time, which is the original Final Fantasy for the NES, you don't always get strength, vitality, luck, intelligence at every single level up, and you get a random number of hit points. Sometimes you get 0. It just really aggravates me that I don't have, like, perfect characters. And it's stupid, it's very small, but it still bothers me, and that kind of incorporates itself into many aspects of my life. This guy also asks, are you that kind of a collector that you still buy the adventure packs and deluxe expansions and now you're going to stuff the shit away? I do continue buying each and every LOTR product. It kind of saddens me to say it, but it is very much kind of stuffed away at the moment. I'm very slowly working on building a custom storage box, but I certainly haven't played the game in quite a long time. I'll look forward to actually opening all those different packs and boxes and getting out all the cards and organizing them and sorting them. But even when I was actively playing the game, I never really touched the paper products much. It was all Octagon playing, so I am looking forward to at least organizing the collection, making everything nice and neat and clean, and maybe someday I will, get back into playing. I don't feel like I have any right to, because of the former kind of, hurt feelings and everything like that, to maybe guest star on an episode of COTR or join them on Twitch or something like that, or even make a guest appearance on The Grey Company. And certainly nowadays, I don't feel like my input is nearly as valuable since I feel so out of the loop. I haven't paid attention to this game since we've gotten 3 adventure packs or whatever. It's such an insurmountable amount of content that I would have to dig through. But I just feel like my value as a community contributor has gone way down. But I've learned, certainly, doing the whole Tenth Nazgul project, it doesn't take too much to get back into the swing of things. So that's pretty much that. I don't have any plans to release additional video contents, but these Q&A things are really interesting. I was inspired to do this by Matthew of miniwargaming.com. He does these sit and talks, and that was the inspiration for this kind of thing. But Diedert's questions, or Dider's questions, are not done yet. He asks, what is it with you and COTR? He has some quote that I think I remember writing at one point. They continue as if I don't exist. And he asks the good old, you mad, bro? And I was certainly not mad, but I was definitely had some hurt feelings that I very much kind of disappeared from that podcast. Nobody really explained to anyone what was going on, but it was kind of the whole stepping on their toes. They felt like I was trying to replace them with Matthew. I felt kind of shitty about doing this big project that I loved, and it kind of excluded them. So ultimately, I wouldn't necessarily say I was mad, but butthurt is a good term for it. But I think that since then, everybody's kind of buddy-buddy again, and hopefully no bridges remain burned. So he also asks, what are you planning to do next? I just recently started playing in an online league for Warhammer Conquest. I've played one game against Brandon, and it was the first game I've ever played. I did enjoy it. My preliminary thought about the game is that it's everything I was hoping the Star Wars LCG would be. Of course, Star Wars didn't turn out to be something that I enjoyed at all, But Warhammer seems pretty cool. Since I played one game, I went ahead and bought 3 core sets. I ordered the winter tournament kit. I'm working on making some homebrew copies of the exclusive worlds and all that crap, alternate arts cards, because of course I've got that collector gotta catch 'em all mindset. But I'd really rather not pay $100 a piece for 6 cards off of eBay. So that's what I've been up to. I just recently got a new laptop, so I'm going to be dabbling in probably Octagon, maybe playing some LOTR with folks, definitely exploring Warhammer Conquest, maybe even starting up some sort of tourney league locally, if for nothing else, to get my hands on some sweet loot. The Hearthstone Goblins vs. Gnomes expansion was just released on the day that I'm recording this, so I'm sure I'm going to be playing that. I always say I'm going to do things like, try to hit legend rank or whatever, and then I'll play 3 or 4 games and then lose interest. So I'm an interesting person in that respect, but that's pretty much what I'm going to be up to. Yeah, I suppose not to touch on personal stuff, that's just my gaming plans. He also asked, how did I come across Matthew to do the progression series? How did I know him? And I kind of mentioned he was just a fan of Cardboard of the Rings, and we started messaging. I've made a few different friends through the podcast. It was certainly super weird for me to talk to Brandon on Skype for the first time. It's not that YouTube people or podcast people are celebrities exactly, but it's kind of a minuscule example of, like, if I were to meet John Bain, Total Biscuit, where he's not exactly a celebrity per se, but he's got, 2 million YouTube subs and different things like that. So you get that, what's it even called? When you see a celebrity and your mind is blown. It was that thing in a microcosm, I guess. So what I'm trying to say here is, if anybody ever wants to reach out and say what's up on Facebook or ask for a game, something like that, I certainly can't guarantee I'll see your message. Facebook isn't very good about notifying you if people other than your friends contact you, but I'd certainly like to chat with you guys and maybe even play a game someday, but I don't know. We'll have to see. I've not played LOTR in a very, very, very long time, and I'm now insecure about my deck building abilities. But now that we're 40 minutes into the show, why don't we get to some additional questions? Thomas V asks, "Hi Mitch, I have a question. In the progression series, you guys always had well-designed decks. Could you give an explanation on how the thought process works? I myself have difficulty pinpointing what to look for in the encounter deck and how to find a solution for that, for example. Perhaps you can give some advice how you did this in the series." So, the heart of the progression series was adopting the mindset, how am I going to absolutely crush this quest that I'm playing? Although Matthew definitely took a little bit different approach, I looked at everything from the mindset, how can I exploit the encounter deck? How can I build a deck to have an answer for everything the encounter deck could come up with? So when we were designing decks for Into Athelion, I guess, especially at first, I would be the one to do a lot of the deck designing. So as things developed, Matthew and I would discuss quite a bit, what heroes would synergize well or complement which. But specifically, I would always look at exact, problematic, difficult encounter cards and try to make sure I had a solution for dealing with them specifically. Into Athelion, a good example is the Haradrim Elite, where when it comes into play, it gets a bonus attack, and action advantage is so important in this game. One of my thoughts was, how am I going to deal with that? So certainly things like Thalin, to make sure that the enemy will take a point of damage as soon as it enters play, are answer for that specific card was the tactics event Swift Strike. So you've already got a point of damage on the enemy, you defend with any character, you play Swift Strike, and you immediately kill that enemy. So you negate its bonus attack, you negate its normal attack, you need not exhaust characters to attack it and kill it in a conventional way, you negate its threat, all sorts of different things like that. If there are locations that are an issue, make sure that you've got a plethora of effects that make that a little bit easier. If you need huge amounts of willpower, maybe consider using things like Faramir, Sword That Was Broken, and stacking things like that. I know that at the end of the Dwaro Delph cycle, and it pains me that I'm struggling to remember what some of these cards were. I feel like I used to have almost encyclopedic knowledge of them. There was some card that was like, give all dwarfs questing +1 willpower, +2 if there's an underground location in the staging area. So it was like, okay, final quest phase, Matthew and I are both running spirits, so we've got these cards, we have an underground location as the active location. Let's play 2, 3, 4 copies of this card and just annihilate everything. For the Riddles in the Dark quest, we're up against a shitload of 1 or 2 or 3 hit point goblins, so let's make sure that Matthew and I have Sneak Attack, Longbeard, Orc Slayer for both of us. Make sure that we save all of those for that most difficult time when there's a staging area that's got, 10 or 15 enemies in it. So it's really just figuring out what cards are going to specifically annihilate the most problematic encounter cards, and I think that's probably the best advice I could give. Matthew made it a point once we got to the Against the Shadow cycle to try and stick with theme and do more interesting decks, like he kind of vowed to not use tactics and things like that, but I very much just kind of approach the game from, what's effective, what works, not what's cute, but what's the most broken player cards. People used to give us a lot of shit about using dwarves in so many videos, but Dane Ironfoot is extremely powerful, and I'm not sure how things have shifted lately, but for a very long time the dwarf decks were almost unbeatable. And when Outlands became a thing, obviously Matthew hates them. I don't view them from that perspective, so a lot of the decks I would suggest would be Outlands. He'd get frustrated and not want to do it, so that caused a little bit of a, I don't know if bad blood is fair to say between he and I, but it was very much, I got so focused on, I really want to crush this scenario, what's going to do it, and then as we moved closer and closer to doing like nightmare difficulty scenarios, which we only ever released the one video for it, I just was really, really laser focused on what's going to annihilate the encounter deck. There's some spider in like Nightmare Passage Through Mirkwood that exhausts a ton of characters, so making sure that you've got readying effects to answer for that. Or, say, the Massing at Osgiliath if you're swarmed in the beginning with a ton of enemies, making sure that you run a hero like Bjorn that can sponge or soak up a ton of attacks. Oftentimes Matthew and I would both run Spirit just so we could both have a test of will, so it's not always fun, not that it sucks all the enjoyment out of playing the game, but I definitely just would suggest approaching things from what's effective, how can I totally cockblock the encounter deck, as opposed to what do I enjoy playing. So that was it for me anyway. Again, that was somebody that, a loss would mean, oh boy, now I get to spend another 10 hours, production time making a video that I'm going to have to, quote, redo after posting it. So, but that's my advice there. I just hope that you continue having fun, even when you lose a little bit more than I did. Paul S. also asked, I'm also curious how people build decks that actually successfully get through scenarios, And that's pretty much it for me. I don't think I can add any more to that. If anybody has any more specific questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. But that's my general perspective or stance on deck building here. Matthew E. says, thanks for offering to answer these questions. Mitch, I know that I was just curious about why you stepped down from the podcast. I think you did communicate some of why you stopped doing the progression series, but more communication would always be appreciated. And I think I've explained that pretty well. He says, of course, it's your prerogative to share and not share, whatever you like, but I hope you know that you're valued by this community. And I appreciate your asking, or I appreciate your saying that, so thank you very much. Jeffrey R. asks, my question would be the same question I'd ask any old friend whom I've not spoken to for a while. How have you been? And that is an interesting story. So, I mentioned I was not happy with that case management job, very much not happy with living with that lady, but that's very much in the distant past now. I ultimately went and worked for that inpatient psychiatric unit for something like 3.5 years, but was eventually laid off as they did downsizing, and I mentioned mental health budget cuts for Washington State. I went and I worked for a different psychiatric hospital, and it was the worst experience I think I've ever had in my life. In 3.5 years, I was never struck by a patient that was hallucinating or delusional or anything like that. Working with violent people all the time, I never felt like I was in danger or anything like that, not even a single time. And then at this new unit, we had to call the police countless times because there was no security, there was no... I'm not really sure how much more I should say, but I will just say I strongly disagreed with how it was run from an ethical standpoint. I think there were a lot of things of questionable legality occurring, and that's really one of the only jobs that I've ever quit. In fact, I think it was the only job that I've ever quit apart from I need to relocate to go to school. So that was pretty much hell. Since then, I thought that I wanted to go into nursing school. My brother is a nurse. I've worked with a lot of nurses. I don't think I want all the responsibility and stress from being a doctor, but as it turns out, nursing isn't exactly my cup of tea either. So I'm currently on a mission of self-discovery, trying to figure out what to do with my life, and really trying to focus more on what I enjoy, what I feel passionate about, and figuring out what that is, what to do with the rest of my life, as opposed to just kind of seeing things through out of obligation. So even the fact that I ultimately dropped out of my program, which I love making jokes about, was just bizarre. So it was very mature, I feel, of me to withdraw from something that my heart wasn't into, as opposed to just seeing it through, because that's what I've always done. I was the valedictorian at my university. I was, the number one ranked GPA student out of 4,616, but I just found myself so devoid of motivation and just absolutely no desire to keep going on or do the work or anything like that, and getting really depressed and really just miserable, and I just felt like it was best to move on. So I since have. My perspective on life is a little bit better. I will freely admit I'm very jealous of my brother's enormous income. He's 3 years younger than I am, but it's just kind of one of those things. I never cared about money until I spent a lot of time around people where that's all they talk about, and that was kind of the experience I had at the psychiatric hospital. Just a final thing to throw it out there is mental health counseling, talk therapy, things like that. I think it's the nationwide lowest paid master's degree requiring profession. So it was just certainly something I never thought about. And now it's just kind of, I don't know. So it's a weird situation. I'm trying to figure out what to do. If anybody has any life advice for me, or any ideas for careers or occupations that you think I would be, that would be a good match for me, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Let's see. On to more questions. Chad G asks, I just want to say, when I saw the 10th Nazgul pop up on my Facebook feed, my initial reaction was, he's back, yes! So I really appreciate what you said in your post, which you can view at facebook.com/the 10th Nazgul or 10th Nazgul show. He goes, even if it wasn't you announcing your return to LOTR LCG videos and podcasts. So it leads me to the question, will you ever start doing what you did again? And if you are thinking about it, what can we, the community, do to help you? Or, dare I say it, we will help you bear that burden, Mitch King, as long as it is yours to bear. I don't have any plans at all to do video content. I would probably enjoy maybe joining COTR or something on Twitch one day if they grace me with that little blessing. Brandon and I are becoming close friends again, I'd like to think, and Sean from COTR is part of that online conquest tournament as well, so hopefully he and I are going to become buddy-buddy as well. And maybe I would do videos. I'm not really sure. Certainly really sporadic and nothing like I used to do, so probably no article reviews or card reviews. The progression series is probably dead. But I'm not completely opposed to doing new stuff. And really, when he asks, what can the community do, it's just always nice to interact with you guys. Something I definitely don't have still locally is much of a social outlet. So other than family, unfortunately, there aren't too many like-minded people here in town. Yesterday, December 7th was the day that occurred, based on when I'm recording this, of 2014. If you're listening to this in the future, I stopped by some new gaming store and I asked about, LOTR and Warhammer Conquest, and the guy just kind of, seemed like he could give a shit less and mentioned he's only heard of one other person interested in Conquest, and Netrunner isn't my thing, but they do Netrunner, they do Magic the Gathering there, so I don't know. So reaching out, saying hi, leaving comments if you guys have additional questions. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to making additional videos. So just say what's up if you'd like. Let's see here. Lako, and again, apologies for mispronouncing, I'm sure. Lako B asks, with the help of Progression Series, I will learn to play this wonderful game. So I assume he has done so. Many thanks for all your work for the LOTR community. Do you think of recording video in a simple manner? Simply start recording, play and have fun, and at the end of the game, stop recording, no cut or editing the video. I certainly have thought about that, but then that perfectionist mindset kicks in where I feel really bad about what I've said. Do I sound stupid? If Matthew says a lot or something like that, does it sound bad? Because of comments and things like that, I would get super hyper focused on, did I say something that's wrong? Did I have a, quote, bad opinion on a card? Or did I forget some sort of combo? Something like that. I alluded to it earlier, but in the gameplay videos, a lot of the editing that occurred was to get rid of boring stuff or long stretches of silence. Like when Matthew and I are playing these games, especially because I was so laser focused on winning, it's like, I think in the video it'll be like, okay, I'll commit 5 willpower to the quest. How about you, Matthew? And he'll just say, I'll commit this character. Something like that. Whereas in reality, we would use those pauses to kind of engage in a lot of discussion sometimes. So I know some people make such a big deal out of table talk, like, oh my god, you can't discuss such and such, that's against the rules, or whatever. But the reality of the matter is I'd end up cutting out a ton of content that was like, well, I can commit 4 willpower to the quest, but I'd really prefer to keep this guy ready in case such and such comes off the encounter deck. Or I can commit these characters, but I shouldn't do this. Why don't you do this kind of thing? And I'll kind of, we'll establish a rough outline for what could happen. A really good example is that Into Athelion, once again, where we ultimately, I think both of us, or one or both of us, ended the game at 49 threat. And I'm sure that watching that video, it looks like a stroke of pure luck that we were able to do that. But we specifically discussed and ultimately edited out this long thing where, okay, let's count how many characters we're committing to the quest. If it just so happens that we pull the Treachery Watcher in the Woods, where, if memory serves, you boost your threat by 1 for each character committed to the quest, who can we commit to the quest to make absolute certain that we don't hit 50 threat and lose? Certainly there was the risk that if a doomed card came up also, we'd be screwed, but it's really stuff like that that we would really carefully discuss. So if it seems like, we're just playing at the speed of light or not really discussing things with one another, that's not exactly the reality of the situation. So for the more difficult quests, at least, Matthew mentioned in the video, I think he'd played Into Athelion like 20 times before he and I ultimately won, which I think that was our first or maybe second attempt. I don't remember. So there's certainly a lot of thought, a lot of discussion that occurs, quote, behind the scenes that is just edited out for the sake of, holy shit, it's boring, or long pauses, or, I'm going to commit all these characters to the quest. Did I commit 16 willpower earlier in the phase, or was it 14? Let me go back and check. Or, since we're both self-conscious about making rules mistakes, because we, don't want to read about it in the comments, if one of us would catch something, it would be like, oh shit, can we go back and, reshoot the play or whatever so that we don't seem like idiots, and all sorts of stuff like that. So in regard to, have I ever considered just recording, playing, and having fun, and at the end dumping it online, I certainly have thought about it. When I came back and did the 10th Nazgul thing, Cardboard of the Rings was so easily able to just mass produce videos that was kind of stressful for me too, because since things stopped with them and I, and we kind of fell out of touch, and there was a little bit of hurt feelings or bad blood going on there, I felt, natural competitive urges, like I really need to crank out content, and they were able to do it so much more quickly because, at least from finally catching up to new episodes, Twitch makes it so easy to just make videos, and Brandon has always been way less uptight and whatnot than I am. He is okay with, say, something that's less than absolutely immaculate. Like if somebody makes an off-color joke, or if somebody makes a mistake, it's not that big of a deal. Whereas in the progression series, I had to, I will never swear. I will play like a cold robotic machine. I will not make jokes, all sorts of different things like that. So it's funny how my personality online is very much dissimilar to how I am in reality. So it's very strange, the whole YouTube thing. But that's kind of the long and short of it there. And then the last question, I think I've covered everything, is David V, who, unless I'm very mistaken, made the Spider-esque t-shirts 2 Gen Cons ago, which he gave to me in Cardboard of the Rings, and That was just such an incredibly amazing thing to do. It was such a bizarre feeling to be in a public place and to be recognized by someone. Oh man, it is just bizarre. But he was an awesome guy. He asks, "You created Lord of the Rings content? Please do elaborate." And as I'm so happy to always say, my name is Mitch, former co-host of Cardboard of the Rings, whom you just might recognize as the Tenth Nazgul. Anyways, he said, couldn't you and Matthew record a nightmare playthrough every now and then? Question mark. I bet it'd be easier if you didn't have to edit in the Gandalf clips. And ultimately, Matthew and I could record a nightmare playthrough. Really, the only thing stopping it from happening is me. I suppose I wouldn't have to hold myself to the same ridiculous amount of editing and whatnot that I used to, but it's kind of the whole completionist thing holding me back now, where it's random videos are fine, but God, it would be so great if it was, here's FFG article 116, 117, 118, here's Against the Shadow scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, everything in perfect sequence. Comparing like what I've established in my playlists on the 10th Nazgul page versus to the content I used to put out video-wise for Cardboard of the Rings, where it's like, here's this scenario, here's this other random, in no way connected scenario. It's much more pleasing for my brain. But, to err is human, and certainly I can't go back in time and change anything, so all I can do now is look forward to the future, kind of the whole self-discovery thing. Maybe someday I'll explore some new personality online or something like that, but it ended up being probably an hour-long video here. I am sure everybody is sick of my long-windedness by now, but I think I'll end it here. So, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'd suggest you click the like button on this video or subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already, but I'm not sure what else is going to be coming out, if anything, so I'm not sure if that would be very useful to anybody. But certainly if you enjoyed this video, I'm very glad. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to ask in the comments. If I get a bunch, maybe I'll make another video like this. It was kind of fun to record, kind of enjoyable to tell people my story, even if I went on some extreme tangents. Hopefully it wasn't too weird, too personal, but in any case, and with that said, thank you guys for watching. Take care.